It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest lecturer in preparation for Te Deum's performance of the all-night vigil, Dr. Vladimir Morosan. Dr. Morosan is widely regarded as one of the leading experts outside of Russia in the fields of Russian choral music and Orthodox liturgical music. He brings a rare combination of deep scholarship and lived tradition, uniting his Russian heritage with a lifelong love of choral music. After completing his doctoral degrees in choral music and musicology from the University of Illinois, Dr. Morosan undertook groundbreaking research in Europe and the former Soviet Union, supported by fellowships from the Watson Foundation, the Fulbright Program, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And his work has resulted in one of the most extensive collections of Russian choral music outside of Russia, now available through his publishing company, Musica Rusica. And his book, Choral Performance in Pre-Revolutionary Russia, remains the definitive study of the subject. But beyond scholarship, Dr. Morosan has shaped the sound of Orthodox liturgical music in the West as founder and artistic director of Archangel Voices. He's also program director of The Rudder on Orthodox Christian Network and host of Sing to the Lord and Ancient Faith Radio. He has served as guest conductor, lecturer, composer, editor, translator, and consultant for Orthodox churches and choirs across North America, all while continuing to share his gifts of music as director at St. Catherine's Orthodox Music in Carlsbad, California. It is no exaggeration to say that no one has done more to bring Russian choral music and Orthodox liturgical traditions into the life of choirs and audiences here in America. We are deeply fortunate to have him with us and to share his wisdom and insights into Rachmaninoff's All Night Vigil. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vladimir Morosan. Welcome.
Thank you, Matthew. That was quite a stunning introduction. I hope I can live up to all of that. Well, this is an opportunity to talk about one of the great choral works in all of choral literature, and happens to be one of my favorites. So it's always easy to talk about it because there's so much to say. It's important, I think, for future audiences, people who are going to be listening to this work, to have a little bit of background in terms of the religious tradition out of which this work emerged, and that being Russian Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodoxy. I think it's one of those aspects of religion that is not necessarily well known in the West. And in fact, it was practically unknown at all. It was unknown before the Russian Revolution. There was very little presence or awareness in the West that there even was this thing called the Orthodox Church. But basically, Orthodoxy goes back to the time of Christ and the apostles, really, with the founding of the church, what's called the Universal Apostolic Church. And in the ancient world of the Roman Empire, there were 5 patriarchates: Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome. And for the first 1,000 years is when the worship of the church kind of took shape and built up with input from great poets and hymnographers. The services were assembled, the services of the daily cycle, of the yearly cycle, and all of those elements that make up Orthodox worship. And in Orthodox worship, what is done in church, what is sung in church, is pretty much scripted, in the sense it's not something that is assembled for every Sunday morning worship, for example. It's pretty much, you want to know what to do, you open a book, a liturgical book, and there it is. It's all laid out. And so it is with the all-night vigil. This is a service that is served in Orthodox churches every single Saturday night. Now it's called all-night vigil, but in reality, it's about a 2.5 hour service, and it consists of vespers and matins put together, assembled together. And this is a preparation then for the Divine Liturgy, which is celebrated typically the following morning, and that's the Eucharist service. Now, every day in the Orthodox calendar has a particular commemoration. It remembers some event that's described in Scripture. It honors particular people, saints or martyrs that lived before. But every single Sunday, the thing that is commemorated is Christ's resurrection, and that's an important thing to bear in mind here, because the text that Rachmaninoff set as part of his all-night vigil specifically are the ones from the resurrectional vigil, the one that happens every weekend on Saturday night. There are other choices he might have made, but this is the one he did. And so it's important for us to understand that what we're listening to are hymns from the resurrectional all-night vigil. Now, the other thing I think it's important to bear in mind is that the all-night vigil of Rachmaninoff didn't just kind of spring into being on its own. There was a fairly extensive background there was a kind of movement in among Russian composers in the late 19th and early 20th century. Of course, in Russia, the history of Orthodoxy goes back to the year 988, when Prince Vladimir of Kiev was baptized and then subsequently baptized his people. So from that time, that's when this tradition of sung worship began in Russia. And I emphasize that because ever since that time and throughout history, in fact, for 2,000 years that the Orthodox Church has existed since the day of Pentecost, worship has been sung, not played by instruments or accompanied with instruments. And there are some deep theological roots and reasons for that. And one can read the saints of the fathers of the church who talk about the reason that we sing and don't use instruments is because we are the new creation. We in the New Testament, we are the perfect instrument. Our body is the perfect instrument to praise God. And so Orthodox worship has never used instruments, and Rachmaninoff's work, of course, reflects that. In more recent centuries, so in Russia, there was this already a 1,000-year, nearly 1,000-year-old tradition of sung worship, and there were chant melodies that were developed over the centuries for various hymns. Towards the end of the 19th century, this movement emerged. It largely had a lot to do with Tchaikovsky. Oddly enough, I mean, people don't necessarily think of him as a reformer in the field of church music, but he did. He did a couple of remarkable things. First of all, he wrote his liturgy, wrote a setting of the liturgy, which actually caused a bit of a scandal because he had it published without getting approval from the director of the Imperial Court Chapel. and they tried to ban Tchaikovsky's liturgy, and there was actually a system of censorship in place where you had to get your works approved in order to have them published and accepted for singing them in church. Well, Tchaikovsky's liturgy kind of broke the grip of the censorship system, because Tchaikovsky's publisher actually went to court and won the case. He said, no, you don't, if this is intended for, let's say, performance in a concert, you don't have to get permission from the Imperial Chapel. And that kind of opened the doors to composition in the church, to creativity in the church, which in the mid-19th century it was a bit stifled because of this system of censorship. The other thing that Tchaikovsky did is that he wrote an all-night vigil a few years after his liturgy. And in that all-night vigil, he turned, he was one of the first composers to turn to this wellspring of chants, these age-old, centuries-old chants. Some of them are known as Znameny chants, some are called Kievan chants, some are called Greek chants, although they're really not Greek, they're sort of Russian Greek chants. And Tchaikovsky was the first person to do this as a composer, to dip into this treasury of melodies. And after him, a number of composers started writing for the church. There were some fabulous choirs in Russia at the time, and composers like to compose works that they know are going to get performed and performed well. And so this entire school arose in and around, centered around the Moscow Synodal Choir and the Moscow Synodal Choir School. Had a fabulous choir of 80 men and boys. It was still a male chorus tradition in that sense, and all these sacred works arose by composers such as Alexander Kostalsky and Pavel Chesnokov, Alexander Rachmaninoff, Viktor Kalinikov, just to name some of the most prominent figures. But there were hundreds and hundreds of works that were written, and concerts of sacred music were a regular occurrence by the Moscow Synodal Choir and other choirs. And coming along then, Rachmaninoff was part of that, in the sense that he was at the Moscow Synodal School was directly next door to the Moscow Conservatory. And Rachmaninoff, of course, studied at the Moscow Conservatory, but he had friends and colleagues who were part of this choral school. One of the professors actually tried to recruit Rachmaninoff to become a church choir master, but Rachmaninoff didn't choose that path, and instead went the way of a composer and a concert pianist and conductor. So, but when it came time to write sacred music, Rachmaninoff turned to Alexander Kostalsky, whom he considered one of his mentors. And first Rachmaninoff wrote his liturgy in 1910, and sent manuscripts as he was writing movement after movement. He would send them to Kostalsky for feedback and critique. And then 5 years later is when Rachmaninoff wrote his all-night vigil. And although we don't have, we have actual examples of his correspondence with Kostalsky about the liturgy. We don't have that same kind of documentary evidence about the vigil, but we do know that Kostalsky kind of advised Rachmaninoff on what some of the melodies that he could use and where he could find them. And furthermore, we can be almost certain that Rachmaninoff had Tchaikovsky's Vigil kind of in front of him, because many of the melodies that Rachmaninoff used are the same ones that Tchaikovsky used. So that kind of puts a little bit of context to this work, and many, of course, then as history happened, 2 years after the creation of the all-night vigil, the Russian revolutions I say plural because there were actually two revolutions in 1917. There was the February Revolution and the October Revolution. The October Revolution was the communist, the Bolshevik revolution. And shortly after that, I mean, the Bolsheviks almost immediately declared war on religion, on faith, and the church. And so it became then next to impossible to write or perform sacred music after that. And Rachmaninoff himself left Russia, spent the remainder of his life in the West, concertizing as a conductor and pianist, and he didn't write any more choral music after that, and no more sacred music. So this was Rachmaninoff's sacred swan song, so to speak.
That's it. It's interesting. It's great to hear how that fits into context and what might have been driving Rachmaninoff. Yeah, I was struck. You said that he was recruited to work in the church, but something that I have read a lot when I read about Rachmaninoff in this work, something I hear said a lot is that he was himself not really a devout practitioner of the Orthodox faith. Can you enlighten us about that?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a inaccurate myth that has been perpetrated by biographers who sometimes copy what previous biographers have said. In fact, more recent in-depth research, in particular about it's in a biography of Rachmaninoff that came out just a couple of years ago in connection with the 100th anniversary of his birth. So that would have been 2023. Cross Rhythms of the Soul is the subtitle of that biography. It shows that, in fact, Rachmaninoff had a lot of intersection with the church, with the Russian Orthodox faith, and that didn't cease actually after he left Russia. He was very supportive of all kinds of charitable causes and church-related causes. So I think it's and then furthermore, I think the music that he wrote, the sacred music that he wrote, shows that he had a deep understanding of Orthodox faith, Orthodox worship. He just didn't wear it on his sleeve, and I think that is where that concept, that idea that he was not religious, came from.
In preparing the piece, it has certainly been hard to reconcile this idea that he himself was not devout or connected to that faith, but then to hear and be learning and performing this music that feels and sounds so clearly imbued with deep passion, connection, commitment. So that makes a lot of sense. That maybe this rumor that he himself was not Orthodox or anti is maybe not so true.
Yeah, that's not accurate, patently inaccurate. And in fact, he died in Beverly Hills in 1943, and the church where the first memorial service that was served in the Orthodox tradition, the day a person dies, a service is already a memorial service is performed, and then there's a cycle of services that lead up to the burial, and then the burial service itself. That service took place at Holy Virgin Mary Cathedral in Los Angeles, where I grew up in that church and directed I was the choir director there for on a couple of occasions for several years. So there's definitely a deep connection between Rachmaninoff and the Orthodox faith.
That's great. Something else you said that really resonated with me as Te Deum has been preparing this piece over the last 3 weeks. Um, you talked about the history of the Orthodox Church not using instruments, being entirely vocal, a cappella, and for an hour long work. We're certainly feeling as a choir the demands of singing such a large scale work uh, fully a cappella. That's just not normally done in choirs. If it's a large choral work, if it's the B minor mass of Bach or Mozart Requiem, we have the support of the instruments, not only to support the sound, but then even to take a break. And it's instrumental for a while. And there are no breaks in this music for the singers. Can you speak more to the virtuosity and demands on the choir of this work?
Well, the demands are certainly there, as you say. Last year, I think there was a little article that came out in again commemorating Rachmaninoff's anniversary in the Choral Journal, and for that I asked several. I posed some questions to a series of conductors and singers who had extensive experience with this work, and like what are the greatest challenges, for example, and the singers, of course, all talked about the demands, the vocal demands, and that intensity that's required. I think that it also speaks to the fact that the high level of ability that the Moscow Synodal Choir possessed. It was a top-notch choir of professionals. That's all they did. They sang services in the Kremlin cathedrals, and the boys were trained from an early age in vocal technique and music theory, and then of course the adult singers as well. So they were really top-notch choral musicians, and that goes back. That tradition goes back for centuries in Russia.
One of the other unique demands of this work also is the extra low notes written for the basses, the low octavists, which is something most choirs don't just already have in their ensemble. Can you speak to the history of that and the presence of that in the work?
Well, I have a theory about that, and there was a period when Russia, the court, particularly the court in St. Petersburg, imported Italian Kapellmeisters, as they called them, the masters of the chapel. Okay, and of course they composed secular music and operas, but when it came to sacred music, composers like Baldassare Galuppi, for example, who was in St. Petersburg in the late 18th century, they couldn't write for instruments. But as we know, in that time, the standard orchestra, for example, had the double bass always doubled the cello line. So you had that. It was kind of an unwritten performance convention that the double bass just plays an octave below. And I think it was a case of, well, if you have the entire country to recruit from, you can find those basses. They are not. It's not the case that every bass in Russia has those low notes, or that the gene pool somehow is different. But the music demanded it, and so they found the singers that could sing those notes, and we have some singers like that in this country as well, and they are always in demand, and they gravitate towards these performances of Russian music, not just Rachmaninoff's, but other composers as well. And what that does, of course, it imparts a richness to the sound. Just from the acoustical standpoint, you have the strong foundation of the bass sound, and the rest of the voices then have something, this luxurious pillow of sound upon which to rest.
And we're very lucky here in Kansas City that two of those octavists that fly around the country singing this work, and have themselves sung it dozens of times in choirs around the country, because that's what most people have to do is fly in the octavist.
Right.
And Kansas City is very lucky that two of those singers, Tu Yang and Kelly Kosi, are right here in Kansas City, and both
Yeah.
are joining us for this performance.
Yeah.
To give some context for any music readers out there, the lowest note you'll hear in our performance, if you can picture the F just below the bass clef. So already one of the lowest notes the basses would ever be asked to sing. They will be singing a full octave below that. It's something that's rare to be heard, and resonates and connects with people in a different kind of way when you hear that sound. And it does something I've found, way more than just impress. It's a lot more than just a virtuosic trick. It somehow changes the spiritual depth of the piece when that sub octave is down there, grounding the chords and grounding the meaning, the affect, of this music. Another thing that's I think especially unique about Te Deum's performance is this work was written in the language of the people. It was written in Church Slavonic, and it is almost always performed in Church Slavonic, though not always. And Te Deum is undertaking a performance of this in English. Can you speak to the challenges of that? Can you speak to the history of that? Rachmaninoff's approval or disapproval of such a choice?
Well, we do know that the edition that I think you're going to be, well, maybe not the one you're using, but an edition of this work in English appeared first in 1920, a mere 5 years after it was composed. And of course, Rachmaninoff was very much alive. So I don't have any specific information, but I'm sure that he somehow acquiesced to that transformation, and that edition was performed or prepared rather by Canon Winfred Douglas, who was a prominent Episcopalian church musician here in America in the 1920s. In fact, a lot of the works of Russian choral composers, this renaissance that I was talking about, that happened in the early 20th century. A great number of those works were translated into English and published as anthems for use in American churches, chiefly Episcopalian, but not exclusively. Lutheran, Presbyterian, whatever. They certainly fit in because they're the texts are scriptural and by and large, and they transfer well into other the worship of other traditions. So this was published in 1920. However, we don't know of too many performances in English. I happen to have been involved in one back in 1975, where a friend and colleague of mine in Los Angeles decided to mount a performance in English using that edition by Winfred Douglas. And there was also a recording that came out back then in a vinyl LP. But there have been, since then, there have been literally many dozens of recordings, over 50 last time I checked. But those are in Slavonic, in Church Slavonic, as you mentioned, which is the original language that it was written in. Yeah.
It was you mentioned a few moments ago about the article you wrote in the Choral Journal where you had interviewed several conductors and singers about the work, and it was in reading that article that I first learned about the recording that was made 50 years ago
Mm.
in English. I knew that there was an English translation early on, but I didn't know how frequently it was done, and I didn't know that there was a recording of it. And it was actually in the reading of that article and learning that that was 50 years ago that was part of my inspiration and decision here on this 50th anniversary year of that first recording in English, is part of what compelled me to do this in English.
Yes.
And I'd also offer that that text is it's so close, it's so thoughtfully crafted and composed and connected to every line that that would make an argument for why it needs to be done in Church Slavonic. That it's so tightly connected, so sort of expertly crafted together. Every swell, every top of every phrase sort of emphasizes it all the right time. That the Slavonic works the best. But it's actually for that same reason that I find personally, I'm finding that presenting this in English, I've sung it in Slavonic. I have not sung it in English before, so
Mm.
this is a first experience for me as well. And what I'm finding is it's precisely because it's so text specific and driven that to do it in the language where the singers don't have to go and read the translation of every word, but can actually present every word with feeling and meaning, uh, makes up for the handful of times where the top of the phrase doesn't quite match with the
Yeah.
most important word of the sentence, because every word they're able to convey with deep meaning and deep conviction. And I found that to be a really profound experience in preparing this work.
Yes, and of course it's also a tremendous challenge because to craft a translation uh, while staying within the because these are not like freely composed poetic texts, but most of them are scriptural. So, you have to convey the meaning accurately, and yet the music is so wedded to the Slavonic text that yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
It's been a challenge, for sure, and I've actually made a few small adjustments to the translation we're using where we found
Hmm.
things that fit a little
Yeah,
bit better.
yeah. I think we
It,
did that. We did that in 1975 as well. There were
yeah.
some adjustments to the translation. But you're right. I think ultimately there is definitely justification for singing in English. I myself grew up in the Orthodox Church, and as a young child, I went to services in Church Slavonic, which I would say people don't fully understand. It's an archaic
Mhm.
form of something akin to Shakespearean English, for example. I mean,
Mm.
there's just archaic words and words that have changed meaning. So for me, uh, discovering when I was a teenager, discovering the liturgy in English and the meaning of the words of what we were singing was a tremendously powerful experience. And I think that your audience as well and your singers will be able to rally around the uh, English aspect of it, and that will certainly add a dimension that perhaps isn't there with other performances
Yeah.
in by non-Russian singers in
Right. Right.
America.
Well, it's that very nature of it was written in the language for the audience to understand, and so for us to present it in the language that our audience will understand, is part of my own personal justification that I think an argument could be made that it's more historically accurate to perform it in the language of its audience,
Yeah.
even though that's not the language it was written in.
Right. Well, and that's one of the, I mean, the Orthodox Church in that sense is different from the Western Church because uh, it has always worshipped in the language of the country where where the church is. We never had like a universal Latin use of
Right.
Latin throughout, no matter where the Catholic Church employed Latin. But the Greek Orthodox Church worships in Greek. The Russian Orthodox Church worships in Slavonic, which is an old form of Russian. In Japan, there's a Japanese Orthodox Church, and they sing in Japanese.
I want to ask a unfair and challenging question. I find that every time I turn the page in rehearsals and in score study, I turn the page to the next movement and sort of have this thought of, oh, this is my favorite movement. And then I turn the page to the next movement. No, this is my favorite movement. And every movement is full of so much and so many different characters that it's what makes this question really challenging. I'm curious though if you have a movement or two that you find personally most moving?
Yeah, that is a difficult question. It's
Maybe a
not fair.
desert island movement or something.
I like the response that one of the interviewees gave in they quoted, I think, Arthur Rubinstein. Says, "What is your favorite piece of music?" And he said, "The one I'm performing." So yeah, it's a little bit of that. I mean, they're just there's 15 movements, and they are all so varied in character and content, in complexity. Some, for example, like movement number 6, the Bogoroitza Deva, Rejoice, O Virgin, Theotokos, is so it's captivating by its simplicity. Whereas something like the Great Doxology, movement number 12, is sometimes referred to as a symphony, a choral symphony, because of the way that the voices are used in almost a symphonic fashion, and there's layering and all the vocal colors and choral vocal colors that are used. And of course there's this magnificent culmination at the end with the towards the words, "Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us." That is in many respects the high point of the vigil. So those are some highlights that stand out. Movement number 8, praise the name of the Lord. That's actually one of the high points in the vigil service itself. The whole vigil, I should mention, I think this is important. There's this overarching plan that the vigil possesses in terms of the texts that are used, and Rachmaninoff certainly was aware of that, and I think his music very much supports that plan. But Vespers is recalling of creation, from the psalm, the initial psalm, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." It's read at the beginning of every liturgical day, and it remembers the creation of the universe, and then the coming of Christ, gladsome light of the holy glory of the immortal Father, Jesus Christ. So that then, and then Saint Simeon's prayer, he says, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, for I have seen the salvation." Okay, I've met, as Simeon was the elder who received the Christ child in the temple. And then the focus kind of shifts, and the matins portion of the vigil is, as I mentioned at the beginning, is all about the resurrection. And so you have this movement from darkness to light. At the point of praise the name of the Lord, all the lights are lit in the church. The clergy process in their splendid vestments to the center of the church, and that's kind of one of the culminating movements in the vigil. But then there is another culmination, and that's the great doxology, which is introduced by the priest exclaiming, "Glory to thee who has shown us the light." And the choir sings, "Glory to God in the highest." And in fact, the first part of the text is similar to the Latin Gloria, Gloria in
Right.
excelsis. So yeah, there's just so much in this piece that it kind of moves from glory to glory.
Pacing this 60-minute work and the exhaustion on the voices is certainly one of the big challenges of this work. But to your point, moving from glory to glory absolutely rings true for my experience leading it within movement and from movement to movement, where uh, you keep feeling like you reach a climax, and then it's like, oh no, there's another climax. Oh no, there's another climax. Oh no, there's another climax. And pacing these many climaxes that happen within single movements and over multiple movements is quite a thing.
Yes, yes. And I think sometimes this question comes up, did Rachmaninoff actually intend for this to be sung in the context of a church service? And I believe that he probably meant it to be a concert work. There was a very well-established tradition of concert settings of the liturgical texts. And as I mentioned, his was by no means the first all-night vigil. There were Chesnikov had written a vigil, Rachmaninoff had written a vigil before 1915. So yeah, the indication would be that this was not intended for performance, because if it were performed, and I actually heard that there is one church in Moscow that year after year, certainly since the fall of communism, they perform around the time of Rachmaninoff's. His date of birth and date of death are like within a couple of days of each other,
Okay.
and so around the end of March, the beginning of April, they have a service. They actually sing the all-night vigil in the context of a service. But that makes that service, I said it was 2.5 hours, it makes it 3.5 hours long. And it doesn't necessarily serve the service to have Rachmaninoff's music sung during it. So
Well, and certainly if he did want it in the context of a service, he would have known it couldn't be done in many services, because
right.
there would be very, very few church choirs that could take on this piece of such demanding vocal virtuosity. Yeah.
Yeah, occasionally some single movements might be sung.
You mentioned movement 6, the Bogorodice Dievo, Rejoice, O Virgin, is certainly done by church choirs from time to time, and there are
Right,
a few other
but in
movements.
the service, it's supposed to be sung 3 times. And see, you can say it right. I mean, that tells you right now that you can't sing that piece 3 times and make it work.
That is so helpful to hear, because actually when you did that math, when you said it's a 2.5 hour service, but if you do Rachmaninoff's work, it makes it 3.5 hours. And in my mind, I thought, well, the music's only an hour, and you have to do those prayers anyway, so it wouldn't add a full hour, would it? But if you're doing movement
Yeah,
6 3 times,
yeah,
then
yeah.
okay, that this all of a sudden makes sense to me now. For our audience who has made it through the 30 or so minutes of this conversation and great insights, I want to ask one final wrap up question. Um, if a listener is hearing this piece for the first time, or for the 10th time, I suppose, um, do you have any insights, any advice on what they should listen for, how they might approach their role as audience member to understand and experience the depth of this work?
Well, I think focusing on the text is probably and how the music heightens the text. It is ultimately the work comes out of a tradition of sung worship, That's the Orthodox understanding, kind of the Orthodox anthropology is that the reason human beings are endowed with the ability to speak and the ability to sing is to sing praises to God in worship. That's sort of the central definition of who we are as creatures. And so the verbal element is incredibly important, as we've already mentioned, and the fact that you're doing it in English even facilitates that more. But also, you're going to have the listener will be bathed in this tremendous richness of sonorous richness of what the human voice is capable of. Many human voices assembled as Rachmaninoff assembled them. But that's the nature that of this work, as it comes out of this 1,000-year-old, in the case of Russia, tradition of sung worship, and Rachmaninoff was able to capture that, I think, extremely well.
Thank you. Dr. Morrison, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your passion, your insights about Rachmaninoff, Russian sacred music, and specifically the all-night vigil. I also want to thank all of you and our audience who joined us to watch this lecture. Conversations like this enrich our experience as performers and listeners alike, and remind us why music continues to speak so powerfully today. Yeah. I look forward to seeing all of you at this performance this coming weekend, September 27th and 28th. You can find tickets still available on Te Deum's website. That's te-deum, te-deum .org. And once again, Dr. Morrison, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, and have a wonderful concert. Yes.
Thank you.